interests together. And this is a change in mindset. And at the time being, to speak frankly, we have not that at the head of the European Council, which is a big difficulty and which is something relatively new if you compare to 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. So the question is how to rebuild this European leadership. And for me, we need to give quickly symbols. We need to have, as the US have European New Leaders program, and we need to have a certain number of it. Up to now, we have only one at European level, which is nothing when the US is dedicating every year, I think it's $500 million to that issue. $500 million every year voted by the Congress, which is one thing. We also need to have European political training for our decision makers, because in fact the European political culture is weak, even when you are a member of a Council of the Union. So that's also a specific issue. We need to promote quickly mobility program for young people. We need to, in fact, give a momentum in terms of leadership. And this is not very, very expensive in terms of budget. But also, we need that some key country of the EU be again respected member of the club. And for that, we need France to join by the club of influencers in Europe, which is also, if you want to be listened to solve out your own internal economic issue. And the last thing is we need to have a real debate on what we mean by economic coordination. Because if we look back some years ago, the British model, the Spanish model, the Irish model were quoted, were mentioned as the example, and everybody wanted to follow them. But we have been knowing that the UK was too much financial focus, that there was an issue in terms of real estate in Spain, that there was some virtual aspect of the Irish model. So the question is also for us to be capable of discussing our economic model in the long run in order to be able to have a more integrated approach. And up to now, we lack of a European economic analysis capacity to discuss that, to provide figures. We have some pieces of it, but all in all, it's very weak. If we regard think tank, an issue you know very well, you take the booking, and you take the budget of the booking. You sum up the budget of all national think tank and European think tank, except German Foundation, and you have the budget of the booking. Maybe it's a bit caricatural, but it's not false. So if you want to be capable of thinking together, you need the means of thinking. And you need a critical mass. So the question for us is also to develop very quickly this critical mass in order to be able to think ourselves collectively.
Well, we're in Turkey, so as Europe finds a new way of political reorganization, how can Turkey be part of this? How can Turkey contribute to sustainable growth in Europe? I think we should discuss these issues. Who would like to elaborate? Maybe Mr. Cohen?
Turkey is the fifth largest market for the EU, following the US, China, Switzerland, and Russia. So if Turkey continues to do well and to grow rapidly, that's definitely good for partners in Western Europe. There are two risks here that have been highlighted by Mr. Babajan last night, which I would want to say a few words about. One is inflation. Inflation is still very high in this country. There were some headlines earlier this week. The inflation has come down in Turkey. Well, it has come down, yes, but from 9.2 in September to 7.8 in October. That's still very, very high. It's almost 3 points above the target of the central bank, 5%, which itself is much higher than in most other emerging markets. India, as far as inflation is concerned, is in the league of India, and not in the league of China. The Chinese inflation number came out this morning for October, 1.7%. So I think on that score, further efforts are needed, and the central bank is using a panoply of unconventional instruments to try and bring down inflation without hurting growth too much. We have yet to see how this works out. The other big risk is the current account, and that follows up on what Mr. Dervish said about saving in Turkey. The lack of saving has an external counterpart, which is a current account deficit. It has come down from double-digit levels recently to around 7.5% right now. But if you looked at the European Commission forecast that came out on Wednesday this week, I cannot talk about the OECD forecasts because they're coming out only 2 weeks from now. But those European Commission forecasts show that the current account gap is likely to widen anew over the next 2 years. It's going to come down in the high 6s, but then it will rise again above 7% in 2014 on current policies. That is uncomfortably high. We have done a special study in the context of the latest OECD economic survey of Turkey of the current account. And if you look across countries, when you're above 5% or so, it becomes very risky. If you look at the financing of the current account in Turkey, you see that the bulk of it is financed short-term rather than through FDI, which is also disquieting. In that respect, Fitch's upgrade this week, which took back Turkey into the investment grade league after 18 years in the wilderness, is of course good news, but it also means that a lot more portfolio investment will come in, whereas what Turkey really needs is FDI. And to get more FDI, I think that the business climate has to continue to improve in this country. If you look at Turkey's ranking in the Doing Business book that the World Bank publishes every year, the latest one just came out, and Turkey is still very, very low in the 71st country worldwide out of 185 countries. That's not brilliant. In fact, Turkey ranks less well than a number of African countries on the Doing Business metric. Another such report is the World Economic Forum competitiveness report that takes a broader view than just business climate, that also takes into account education, for example, infrastructure, and so on. That puts Turkey at the 41st rank in the latest ranking out of 133 countries. A bit better than Doing Business, but still a lot of room is there for further improvements. On education, Mr. Babajan mentioned this last night. Turkey has made a bold move recently by extending compulsory education to 12 years, which will take effect only over time as cohorts age. However, there is a serious issue of the quality of education in Turkey. If you look at the OECD PISA scores, which compare achievements of 15-year-olds across OECD countries, you see that Turkey scores very poorly on math, reading, and science tests. So there is an issue of recruitment, training, and evaluation of teachers, also of autonomy of schools in Turkey that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I would like to turn to Mr. Dervish about his views on the placement of Turkey in the new Europe. Where do you see Turkey?
Well, I think, of course, many of us said, and we're here, many of us, because we believe that Europe and Turkey have so much to give to each other, and that, in fact, Turkey is a European country, primarily a European country. I also feel that in no way diminishes. On the contrary, I think somebody said it this morning, the influence one can have in the region, in the Mediterranean, in the Arab world, in the Middle East. There's a poll asking Arab citizens whether they would like Turkey to be in the European Union, and 66% of Arabs say, yes, we would like Turkey to be in the European Union. So there's no contradiction between Turkey playing an important role in the Middle East and its European membership. President Gül, President of the Turkish Republic, several times told me that in his visits, in his discussions, the fact that there was the European link greatly increased Turkey's influence and weight in international affairs. And so there's a great benefit here from that for Turkey. I think for Europe also, there is a benefit in the sense that Europe is a continent, a group of countries where the Mediterranean and the Middle East is very close and very important historically. I mean, the Mediterranean, in many ways, is part of Europe as an area. And to stabilize that area, the Balkans, the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, having Turkey inside, working with France, working with Germany, working with the European Common Foreign Service on a zone of peace and compromise in this whole region is, I think, a great positive contribution that Turkey can make to Europe. So I think the reasons are there. Now, it's going to be complicated. Already now, I mean, I think many people will say, well, you're discussing this while Europe says we have to fix our own internal house. We cannot now, don't talk about enlargement, please. We have enough problems, And I think many people's reaction now is to say, hey, wait, this is not the topic of today. Let's not discuss it today. Maybe 5 years later we come to it. I can see the reason for saying that, but I think it would be a grave mistake because we've lost so much time. If we now let it go another 2-3 years, frankly, I think the dynamics will go, I don't know, one can never be sure, but I'm afraid the dynamics could go further apart. Turkey might further and further see itself as not part of Europe, but as part more of the Middle East. The internal problems of Turkey will increase because Europe has helped stabilize the internal politics of Turkey. If it's no longer a reference, if nobody cares about what the European Commission produces as a report, then the influence of Europe on Turkey becomes zero. And so I think that's not good. And on the European side, I think as Europe thinks about its future, it's important that it brings into that thinking Turkey's place, that it's not added on 3 years from now, but that already when now Europe said, okay, how is the parliament going to function? And I fully agree with Guillaume. There's going to be a European parliament, but then there will be another, either part of the European parliament or a new parliament mixed between national parliaments and the European Parliament where the Eurozone problems will be discussed. So in this whole réflexion, in this whole thinking, Turkey must be there. If it's completely out, something will come that then in the end will be hard to join. So I think on both sides, the European side and Turkish side, we must make an effort to imagine 2023, the 100th anniversary of the Republic, being part of the European Union. I think it should be a great moment for Turkey. And to get there in a way that is feasible, practical, that doesn't scare anybody, it will take some time. But as I said this morning, I actually think the European crisis, which forces Europe to rethink its structure, is also a great opportunity, not only for reform inside Europe, but for structuring Europe and the European political institutions in such a way that they can accommodate Turkey. I think the French and the Germans will be less afraid when they know that in the Eurozone Parliament, there won't be any Turkish deputies. So they can be happily the two big powers in the European Parliament. But in the larger European Union Parliament, there should be Turkish representatives, just as there should be British, Norwegian, and maybe Swedish. We will have to see. And that then is less scary for Europe and also easier for Turkey to join because the degree of sovereignty sharing, which Europe has learned over decades and is still having problems with, one can't ask Turkey to do a degree of sovereignty sharing that France and Germany are ready to do kind of overnight. So in many ways, this is an opportunity, but I don't think we have too much time. I think if we wait till the crisis is overcome and everything, if we don't do anything the next 2-3 years, we may end up having missed a really wonderful opportunity.
Well, Turkish exports to EU has fallen down to 30%, and even when in Europe there is good economic outlook, the exports are 1% of the total imports of EU. I would like to turn to our French friends. What do they say about this issue? Maybe, Henri, you would like to elaborate a bit on that. What can Turkey do and Europe should do to export more from Turkey so that Turkey contributes more to sustainable growth in
Well,
Europe?
two things. I mean, first, on the previous point, I'd like to say that I fully agree with Kemal. I think the crisis should not be used as an excuse not to pursue the negotiations and the dialogue, because if it were to happen, I think we would take a very, very significant risk. On your second question, I think Ali Babacan has said it yesterday. There is nothing wrong for Turkey in trying to diversify its exports. It's a fast-growing country. Its exports are growing. The fact that it's diversified and that you are exporting to other countries in Europe is fine. It should not be seen as a failure of Turkey vis-à-vis Europe or as a reluctancy from Europe to import from Turkey. I think these events, which are facilitating the dialogue at all levels, I mean political, social, economic, create a mutual understanding which leads more, hopefully is going to lead more Turkish firms to export to Europe and more European firms to do direct investments in this country. It's going to be progressive, but as insurers, we know that diversification is a way to reduce risk. The fact that Turkey tries to diversify its exports is a good thing when it's in a picture where these exports are growing. I would be preoccupied if the total volume was decreasing. It's not the case today. I mean, Turkish exports to the EU, I don't think they are decreasing in volume. They are decreasing in percentage. Nothing wrong with it if it's in a picture where the total is still increasing.
Okay. Mr. Yavan, would you like to add anything?
Turkey, let's see the other part of the equation. Turkey has to grow around 6% every year in order to keep the unemployment rate intact. Therefore, with Europe or without Europe, with multi-speed Europe or with a single speed Europe, we have to secure that growth on average has to be around 5-6%. And if you look at the equation from this standpoint, I think definitely we have to diversify our export and import as well. Be it Iran, Iraq, Syria, whatever, we have to have a more secure geographic diversification of trade. And this is what we have done over the last 20 years or so, and the foreign policy option of the government has played an important role as well. They paved the way, and the business people simply followed, and now we have almost 25% of our export with our neighbors. It was only, 5% or something a couple of decades ago. So therefore, even in Africa, in Far East, we have a better penetration of trades, and possibly we will going to continue. But we also proved that even 0% growth in Europe, we still continue trade with Europe, and we still grow around 4%. Therefore, the perspective of growth is more robust. The dependence of Turkey to EU is going to be less and less. I'm not telling you that it's going to be insignificant. Definitely, EU is going to be the main partner. But in many respects, in order to secure 6% growth, this is, I think, a technical implication that, you know, we have to diversify our economic activity over the Middle East, neighboring countries, Northern Africa, Far East, and that's what we've been doing over the last 20 years.
So the business outlook is good. I mean, no barriers in Europe, nothing on that side?
No, I think in terms of European restructuring, I think we have the opportunity to wait and see. We are not in a rush, but definitely we want to be a part of it as business society. We want to make the most of it, but we are not in a rush. We're going to see how Europe is going to be restructured, as Mr. Davish stated, whether it's going to be the same, whether it's going to be multi-speed, and then I think we're going to find a place to fit Turkey in. But in terms of welfare and potential growth perspective, I think we're not in a rush.
Well, we have 10 minutes left, so I would like to turn to the audience for questions and remarks. Please.
I think while we are praising Turkey's diversification of export markets, we should also be a little bit cautious because one of the main problems of Turkish industry and Turkish economy is the low intensity of technology in Turkish exports. Turkish exports are generally low to medium technology intensive, which makes them import dependent. And we also know that Turkish growth is more or less import dependent. I mean, 5% growth rate is great, but it's also import dependent. And this pushes Turkey towards a middle income trap, which means that after a certain years of high growth, Turkey either has to cool down the economy or there is shrinking of the economy and economic crisis. So the challenge in front of Turkey is not only to increase its exports and to diversify export markets, but also increase the technology intensity of its exports. And I doubt that Turkey can do this by selling, say, biscuits to Africa. So the EU market is not less important for Turkish exports than it used to be because Turkey's exports made to the EU are relatively higher tech than Turkish exports made elsewhere. And here actually I would like to ask a question to Kemal Dervish. So Mr. Dervish, are there any quick remedies to, not quick maybe, but let's say, are there any structural reforms to increase the technology intensity of Turkish industries and exports?
Well, there's no magical way to do it. Of course, the whole skill system, education system is very important. But I think some focused sectoral support to, I don't believe that the state or the planning people can decide which sector really will be the best. I think, but in general, a support for sectors that use technology in Turkey, that adapt it. I mean, it exists already to some degree, these incentives. I think these incentives can continue and be strengthened. And finally, I think the direct foreign investment dimension is very important because a lot of technology still comes through direct foreign investment. Direct foreign investment is the best way of financing the current account deficit. And therefore, I think having an investment climate that really attracts direct foreign investment under decent supervision, of course, by the state, with decent tax and incentive laws. But I think that is very, very important. Turkey is still, if you take the cumulative amount of direct foreign investment that has happened in Turkey over the last 20 years, it's minuscule compared to Mexico or Brazil or countries of that sort. So there's a lot of potential still there, particularly since we are basically de facto in the European single market. And of course, not in the service side, but in the industrial side. So I think there's a great potential there, which will also help macroeconomically, because instead of having hot money that comes and goes, we have long-term investment.
Yes, I would like to come back to what should be done in the Eurozone for it to get out of the crisis. It's true that we have, I think, overcome the worst of the crisis. It's been done last summer. And I think we are on the path of recovery. Of course, it depends on the way all countries, members of the Eurozone, do their own homework. I must again say that as far as France is concerned, we are making efforts not only to bring down the state deficit, but to bring down the overall, in the sense of Maastricht Treaty, the overall public deficit, including local government and social security, since we set up a target for next year, not more than 3% of GDP, whereas we came from 5.7 only a year and a half ago, and because, of course, we have to implement, of course, and to respect the rules. But I want to say that, and I want to add that France will respect the 0.5% structural deficit as set up in the fiscal treaty next year. But apart from that, it's true that we need to have, for the monetary union to get along well, I must recall that it's not only a monetary union, it has to be an economic and monetary union, as was set up in the Treaty of Maastricht. And for that, we not only need to have a fiscal union, which is well on the path, if all members of the Eurozone respect, of course, the treaties, but we also need to have a banking union, which has begun to be put into place. And more than that, we will need to have a harmonization, some kind of harmonization of our companies' taxes and of the taxes on savings. Because we've been discussing for more than 30 years inside the European Union of harmonization of tax on savings, and we have done nothing in that sense. And when I heard Pierre talk about the differences of wages in agriculture between France and Germany, I must recall just two figures that were given to me very recently by Bruno Le Maire, a former agricultural minister in France, who is a friend, a political friend of Pierre. I don't know if Pierre is still there, and who told me that since there are no minimum wages in agriculture in Germany, because there are no convention collective, I don't know what's the English word for that, social contract, the wage